All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Emi Curia, and today I will be raising awareness about the Fujoshi community and their obsession with homoerotica within Japanese media culture. So before I get started, I want to go over some quick definitions with you all that I will be using. Um, this Japanese word right here on the left is called Fujoshi. It's written here in kanji, which is one of the alphabets used in Japanese that uses symbols and derives from Chinese. The first kanji here means respectable, and the second two kanji here mean women. So together it means respectable women. When I talk about fujoshi, I'm actually referring to this kanji. Japanese people recently created a homonym for this subcultural group. So while it's pronounced the same way, fujoshi, the first kanji has a very different meaning. While this kanji means rotten. So in Japanese, fujoshi means rotten women. And this rottenness refers to the media that fujoshi consume. BL and yaoi. So BL stands for boys' love, a literary genre depicting homosexual relationships. This term is typically an umbrella term for all homosexual literature. Yaoi is a subgenre of BL that deals with depicting sexual relations between the couple. Yaoi here is written in hiragana, which is the simplest alphabet in Japanese, because it's an acronym. The word stands for yamanashi, ochinashi, iminashi. And this literal translation is no peak, no fall, no meaning. The Japanese made this word to further degrade fujoshi, as it implies that yaoi is not a respectable form of literature, as it focuses entirely on sex without any plot or character development. And they're not completely incorrect about this. Before I get into the fujoshi community as a whole, I want to talk to you about what yaoi really is. So yaoi and BL are usually depicted in manga, which is a Japanese style of comic books and graphic novels, and doujinshi, which is digital fan-made artwork. Many fans like to create yaoi of their favorite anime characters and can distribute these works online. And this has caused yaoi to actually become available internationally through illegal online distribution. And these are some pictures of some well-known yaoi manga. And there are a few key characteristics of yaoi. First, in these pictures, as you may see, the men are drawn androgynously. There is usually one male that is more feminine, as you can see like on the left here with this manga cover. The male on the left here is more feminine. He's really skinny and he has those big sparkling eyes. And the other on the right here is more masculine with a big muscular body, but still maintains that androgynous look. And if you look at all three covers, you can see that this is translated throughout almost all of yaoi here. By doing this, fujoshi are able to put themselves in the shoes of each person while also getting to voyeuristically watch sexual love between two men. And second, these works are usually made by straight women for other straight women to consume. However, yaoi is now starting to gain traction in the LGBTQ community as well. Third, these works tend to be extremely pornographic and are typically accompanied by an R18 plus sign. As the porn industry has a wide range of options, the same can be said for the yaoi genre. Obviously, I cannot put them on this presentation. It's very obscenely pornographic, but hopefully these covers can show you a little glimpse into what yaoi might entail. So now I want to talk to you about the fujoshi community themselves. The fujoshi community mainly consists of heterosexual women. They are severely looked down upon by Japanese society. Fujoshi are feared for their encouragement of homosexual relationships and the potential corruption of their children who may read this pornographic literature. Japanese people may compare them to otaku, which are a group of people in Japan who are obsessed with manga and anime. In Japan, otaku are viewed as losers and pedophiles, as there have been many incidents of male otaku assaulting or murdering young Japanese women. But female otaku have a fairly easy time hiding themselves from the public eye, whereas male otaku struggle in this respect. In reality, a woman may never confess to being a fujoshi. Fujoshi hide entirely online. And by hiding online, they may harbor feelings of shame and self-humiliation for enjoying something that is socially deviant. But they thrive online in their community, sharing and creating yaoi works for the rest of the community. And this really creates a sense of belonging and support for fujoshi. Now that I've talked to you about the community, I think you may be able to see that this is a contemporary social issue. And with this issue, there are two main arguments. One for yaoi and fujoshi, and one against. On one side of this issue, some people sympathize with fujoshi. Many think that due to Japan's culture, fujoshi may simply be women who are discontent with Japanese social and gender norms, where women are submissive and men are dominant. In yaoi, there is no woman involved in a relationship. Therefore, women are completely free from male and societal gaze. And since they are often under that gaze, yaoi may be extremely pleasurable for them. There is also an argument that fujoshi are being creative by changing the meanings of a text by imposing homosocial relationships. For example, when fujoshi watch an anime, they may see friendship between two male characters as romance and love, or they may see a rivalry between two characters as jealousy. And then some will go on to create yaoi of their favorite pairings and then share them with the rest of the community. And so some people think that by being creative, they are doing something good with their works. And a third point is that gay love stories are becoming more mainstream in Japanese media culture. On the right, I have a very popular anime called Yuri on Ice. And when Yuri on Ice was released, it was famous for its very strong underlying homosexual plot between the two main characters. But even in this case, the relationship between the two male characters is solely implied, and it's never explicitly said that the two characters are homosexual. On the other side of this issue, there are many people who do not condone yaoi. First off, Japanese society resents yaoi for its depiction of homosexuality and pornographic nature. Yaoi can also be very pedophilic, and with many stories taking place between middle and high schoolers. I don't know if you can recall the slide I showed you with the 3 yaoi covers, but 2 out of 3 of those were actually depicting high school boys. And one of them was exclusively talking about boys who went to an all-boy private school together of high school age. This has caused problems with the law, as you can see maybe why. Many Western countries have laws against depictions of minors in underage sex. The US specifically has the Protect Act for this. However, this is legal in Japan. And this is why yaoi can be found at almost any large bookstore that you go to in Japan. Some countries have also outlawed BL due to its depiction of homosexuality. There are also many LGBTQ+ activists who do not condone yaoi. They say that fujoshi are fetishizing and stereotyping gay men. Many BL writers are heterosexual women writing about gay men. And because they are straight women, they rarely depict real homosexual relationships. For them, homosexuality is all about sex and romance. And these women also do not have access to a male body. So their depictions of the male body and homosexual sex may be completely inaccurate. So by over-sexualizing and stereotyping gay men and perpetuating this narrative that gay men are promiscuous and sexually charged, they are perpetuating a false narrative that is harmful to the way homosexuality is viewed. Japanese gay men are also taking a lot of hits from yaoi. They have to deal both with Japanese society that already is against homosexuality in yaoi, but they also have to deal with people having false views of homosexuality from their exposure to yaoi. In conclusion, today I have discussed the fujoshi community and the different views on this community and their artwork. Some people sympathize with Fujoshi and think they may be achieving some good by normalizing homosexuality and expressing their creativity, but many others do not condone its pornographic content and stereotyping of gay men. Thank you so much for you all for listening to me today. And thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld, for moderating.
And thank you, Emmy.
Thank you.
Moving right along, next up we have Jordan Greenstein, who is a third-year anthropology major at UNCG, as well as a disciplinary and international honor student in the Lloyd International Honors College. Some of her accomplishments include being a teacher education fellow, sitting on the Intercultural Leadership Council, being on the Chancellor's List, and the completion of the Bronze and Silver Leadership Challenges offered through the Office of Leadership and Civic Engagement here at UNCG. Presenting an analysis of Daniel Miller's A Theory of Shopping, please join me in welcoming Jordan Greenstein.
Thank you. Let me get this all quickly set up. There we are. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Greenstein, and today I will be discussing my analysis of Daniel Miller's A Theory of Shopping. First, a bit of an introduction to the topic. Daniel Miller is an anthropologist known for his studies of human relationships with things and his studies in digital anthropology. Today, we'll be focusing on one of his studies of human relationships with things. The study I was referring to is documented in Miller's book, A Theory of Shopping. From 1994 to 1995, Daniel Miller interviewed and observed 76 households in North London. He mostly focused on the female perspective of provisioning thrift and treats, which I will define later on. From his research, Miller develops his main argument or theory, which states that shopping is not an individual endeavor. Shopping is done for the expressions of a relationship between the shopper and the intended recipient, and shopping is done for a goal based on values of cosmological origin. During his write-up of this book, Miller notes a secondary argument that states that ritual sacrifice and shopping have similar structures. As I said, Miller focused on the female perspective on various components of shopping. So in my research and analysis of his work, I tested the application of his theory on the male perspective of shopping. Getting into my research, let me tell you about my sample. The sample for this research was 10 participants from 7 different households. Of the sample, 50% were women and 50% were male with ages ranging from 21 to 47. In determining my sample, I used convenience sampling. I asked friends and family members to participate in my research as was instructed. This technique was beneficial for the study as it allowed me to explore the topic of research and create a list of points to consider when conducting the participant observation. Now let's discuss my field site, which is slightly complicated. All research was technically conducted in Greensboro, North Carolina. However, not all participants were located in Greensboro at the time of their interviews, since interviews were mainly conducted either via phone or at the participant's residence, though the participant observation was conducted in Greensboro at the same target, just on 2 separate occasions. The data collection methods used in this research were semi-structured interviews and participant observation. The entire sample was required to participate in a semi-structured interview. This means that each participant was led through a questionnaire with the occasional follow-up questions and did not adhere to a strict interviewing schedule. The questionnaire was compiled of 4 sections. First was the demographic information, which provided the basic information I just provided about my sample, and the 3 remaining sections, provisioning, treat, and thrift, I will go into more depth later. 2 members of the sample participated in my participant observation, which is a data collection technique that involves the researcher observing a participant while simultaneously engaging in the activity. I accompanied both participants on their separate trips to Target, and after shopping, both participants were then interviewed on their shopping experiences, religious identity, and beliefs on rituals and sacrifice. So what did I learn in the interviews and participant observation? According to Miller, provisioning is the act of acquiring necessities. So while investigating, there were 3 things I had to do. First, I had to clarify the definition of necessity. According to my sample, necessities are the items required for the completion of daily tasks. Second, I had to determine if participants believe necessities are universal or differ from person to person. 60% of the sample believe that necessities are different from person to person, while 40% of the sample believe that necessities are the same for all people. And finally, I had to determine if participants separate their provisions from others. Only one participant firmly stated they separate their provisions from others, while 50% stated they do not, 30% stated that it depended on the items, and 10% could not answer since they lived alone. Now, treats include any special purchase made with respect to a particular group, often including the shopper. According to my sample, 100% participated in purchasing treats. 50% were willing to spend double on a treat for others than on a treat for themselves. 30% were not willing to double, and 20% it felt it depended on the treat and or the person the treat is purchased for. I even had one participant noting that a treat he would be willing to purchase for a spouse differed from a purchase he would be willing to make for an offspring. I also had varying justifications for purchasing treats. Participants purchased treats for themselves because they wanted the item, they did not have the item growing up, or to make themselves feel better or happy. While as far as the justification for purchasing treats for others goes, participants offered one of the following variations. It was either to make the recipient smile, to show that the participant cares, to make the participant happy, or to see the recipient enjoying the treat. Now, according to Miller, thrift involves the strategies by which shoppers attempt to save money while shopping. My sample came up with 3 strategies: purchasing items on sale, using coupons, and finding the best deal for an item. Of the sample, 80% participated in thrift, and of this 80%, 63 thrifted every single time they shopped, and 100% thrift in order to save money. Now, what I learned from the participant observation is best divided into 3 sections. First, I learned that both participants chose Target due to its convenience and having the required items for purchase. Second, I learned their individual religious identities and their definitions of ritual. One participant defined ritual as a set of certain actions done in a specific way to follow a belief, while the other defined it as a significant event with a recursive temporal component. Both participants did agree, though, that a ritual can be used in both realms of the sacred, so the religious, as well as in the realm of the profane, or the everyday. Third, I learned from these 2 participants what sacrifice is and how they see sacrifice in their everyday life. One participant stated that sacrifice is giving something up in hopes that it has the effect to get the desired result, while another commented, in the process of decision-making, weighing the goods and bads, the sacrifice would be the bad things. For these participants, some of the sacrifices they see include giving up a 30-minute break to help a patient coding, giving up personal space in public areas, and resisting the urge to purchase treats. Now, how this relates back to Miller's theory is that both participants agreed that shopping is a ritualized behavior. However, there was disagreement on Miller's idea that shopping is done as an expression of relationships with others, with one participant even noting me trips, which solely benefit the shopper. So far, I have introduced Miller and his theory on shopping, as well as shared the data I collected from my sample. In our last moments together, I want to discuss areas of bias, suggested changes to the research process, and finally, my conclusions. There are 2 main areas of bias in this research. First is due to the small sample size. Only having 10 participants means that my data can be unrepresentative of the population. Second, due to my personal connections to the sample, since the sample was comprised of family and friends, it calls into question the validity of their answers. Moving into the changes, if given the opportunity, I would have pre-tested my questionnaire. One point of confusion for the sample was the definition of thrift. Pre-testing would have shown me to provide a stronger definition in the interview process. I also would have created a more precise field site. As I stated previously, while I resided in Greensboro during the entirety of the research, not all of my participants did. And this has added another layer of complexity to my findings. Due to the complexities we just discussed, I do not have confident conclusions, but more so points of further consideration if this research were to be replicated. First, I do believe I have possible application of Miller's theory to the male perspective. Oftentimes, the responses I receive from male participants match the responses of the female participants in both mine as well as Miller's research. Second, a future researcher would have to determine whether the findings are a condition of the changes in time, location, or both. Since Miller conducted his research in the mid-1990s in North London, while I completed my research in the fall of 2021 in Greensboro, the differences in our findings could be a change in physical location, a change in 30 years' time, or a combination of both. Finally, Miller took on a heteronormative approach to his understanding of a household, meaning that to Miller, a household was a man, a woman, and their offspring. So I would heavily suggest a future researcher consider the application of Miller's theory on varying household makeups, such as those that include same-sex couples, as well as non-binary and transgender individuals. And that is all I have today. Thank you so much for coming to my analysis of Daniel Miller's A Theory of Shopping.
Thank you, Jordan. Next up is Sophia Rosenberg. Sophia is a sophomore anthropology and religious studies major at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, who is interested in studying subcultures in depth with a particular focus on digital subcultures. They're a member of the Lloyd International Honors College and part of the 2021 cohort of the UNCG Guarantee Scholars. Please join me in welcoming Sophia, who is presenting Did You Even Understand the Lyrics? The UK Punk Scene and the Attempted Invasion of White Supremacy and Far-Right Ideology.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld, for the introduction. Give me 1 second to... Voila. So, in this paper, I will attempt to analyze what exactly made the British punk scene during the 1970s and 80s so appealing to the British far right, and how punk's very, very complicated relationship with race set the precedent for the invasion of white supremacy. So, to start off with, if you are familiar with punk, you're definitely familiar with I would consider them the three pillars of the subculture: the loud and vulgar music, which is either apolitical or political; the fashion, which is both eye-catching but yet still practical; and of course, the politics. At this time in Britain, anarchism was the dominant political ideology among punks in response to the British government's handling of the economic depression that ruined the social conditions of the working and lower class citizens. Having said that, this sentiment of punk being inherently political, specifically being inherently leftist, is not entirely accurate. Punk is leftist. It's not inherently leftist. Punk arose from Britain's skinhead subculture, which was made up of young white working class men who channeled their anger at the British Parliament into vandalism. Enter the National Front, a far-right organization that still exists today that is primarily made up of neo-Nazis who frame non-white immigrants as threats to traditional British society and culture. At the time of Britain's economic depression, the National Front grew exponentially in popularity and in membership because they purposely targeted the British working class by claiming that non-white immigrants were the reason behind the ongoing depression and were even the cause of it. Therefore, skinheads and their subculture were the perfect breeding ground for spreading far-right ideologies. Once skinheads were assimilated into the far right, the punk scene was seen as the next obvious target due to their familial relationship. While a majority of punks claimed that the British punk scene in its beginnings, specifically in the 1970s and 80s, always stood against racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, etc., an examination of the emergence of punk and its relationship with marginalized groups tells a very different story. The obsession that white, cisgender, straight male punks had with being self-marginalized underdogs I use that term very loosely, caused the scene to fail in creating a strict boundary between white supremacists and the late 20th century British punk scene. Now, why is this? What did they do? Why did they want to be underdogs so badly? Well, firstly, punk as a music genre was built off of Black music. Particularly, it was built off of reggae and Afro-Caribbean ska. Black music was inherently rebellious in a white mainstream culture. In the case of punk, Black music was appropriated by white punk musicians to create music that dominated the scene and catered towards the white male punks in that scene. Therefore, this alienated the Black people who created the very music that was the foundation of punk music. Black people were therefore shoved out of a so-called progressive subculture, which forced them to create their own punk subgenres, such as Afro-punks, that would become safe havens for minorities who felt unwelcome in the white-dominated punk scene. Secondly, the traits and statuses associated with minorities were used by white punks as authentication markers. Real punks had to know what it meant to be labeled as outcasts, to not have stable access to food or shelter or water, to be kicked while they were down, to be hated by the British Parliament, to be marginalized, self-marginalized. Because depending on the person, these acquired statuses were the result of self-marginalization in an attempt to create their underdog identity to validate their punkness. Minorities still are, and back then, are born into a life of oppression and discrimination in British society. White punks, on the other hand, made the conscious decision to align themselves with historically oppressed groups to further cement the underdog identity they wanted so badly, despite the fact that they could easily step out of this identity at any time and go back to a much more comfortable lifestyle and therefore a much more privileged lifestyle. Finally, despite punk's foundation being the culture of marginalized groups, especially Black culture, the hostility and tendency for violence found in the British punk scene at this time was aimed at authoritarianism and the British Parliament, understandably so, but it was not aimed at social issues that primarily affected minorities. It wouldn't really be an exaggeration to say that they didn't care about those issues as much. For example, the swastika, which we all know what the swastika means, was used as an accessory for shock value by many prominent punk figures, including Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, as seen on the left, and Susie Sue of the Banshees, as seen on the right. The supposed support of minorities in the punk scene contrasted greatly with the use of Nazi imagery, and not only this gave mixed signals to two groups of people: the minorities, especially Jewish people who were in the scene or were looking to join the scene, and the white supremacists who wanted to recruit more people into the British far right. There was an evident lack of action from white punks against oppressive systems that disproportionately affected poor minorities. And this contradicts the common belief that punk was built upon socially progressive ideologies, because at first it was an apolitical subculture that centered around a romanticized rebellion against the British mainstream culture, but not the larger political and social spheres that were intersected with it. In conclusion, punk was attractive to the British far right because punk itself was built on the appropriation and fetishization of traits, statuses, and cultural activities that separated marginalized groups from dominant groups. As a result, minorities were outcasted from the British punk scene, despite their cultures being the very foundation of it. And therefore, punk came to be seen as a white male dominated space, and therefore was seen as the perfect place for the British far right, and by extension, the National Front, to use an attempt to spread far right ideology. Dr. Tony Vandermeer, an academic who specializes in African studies, though he wrote this quote in reference to the commercialization of rap music, I believe it sums it up perfectly. Honestly, it really, so quote, "There is nothing wrong with one community learning the cultural forms produced by another if it respects their specific shapes and meanings. There is something horribly wrong with a dominant community repeatedly co-opting the cultural forms of oppressed communities, stripping them of their vitality and form, the heritage of their creators, and then popularizing them." Thank you.
And thank you, Sophia. And thank all three of our presenters. We have a long, luxurious 20-minute question and answer session for discussion here now. So I'd like to invite those who would like to ask a question or perhaps offer a reflection that has been sparked by our presenters. If you could indicate that by raising your hand using the hand raise option under reactions. If you'd prefer to drop a question in the chat, you can do that too. And as there are opportunities to get caught up on the chat, I'll try to read those out. But yeah, so let's start with any takers for questions. Well, oh, yes, Emmy.
I have a question for Sophie. So in the title of your presentation, it was called, "Do You Even Understand the Lyrics?" What does that have to do with your presentation? Were there like subliminal messages within the lyrics of some of their songs? I don't know, I just wanted to know.
No worries. That's a fantastic question. I do have to admit, my paper was extremely long and is incredibly hard to condense race relations and the punk scene and the response to it all within a 10-minute or less presentation. And so Did You Even Read the Lyrics mainly refers to, there's a tendency of white supremacists in general, not just in punk, to take anything out of context and use it for their own means. And in reference to punk, lots of punk songs later down the line, mainly in the 80s and 90s, especially not only in the British punk scene, but as well as the American punk scene, they were much more political and much more direct in their calling out of politicians and primarily actions of the government that were harmful. They were harmful to marginalized people, especially. And later down the line, white punks became much better at using their privilege to help those minorities. However, their white supremacists often don't listen in depth to these lyrics. And it's, even though they'll believe that the music is angry, and just because the music is loud and angry, they won't take the lyrics, they won't take the history behind the subculture into consideration, and they'll adopt it into their own. And the use of punk by white supremacists kind of shows that they don't know anything about it. They have this idealized version of punk, which is in reality, looking back, is just what they wanted, what they liked about skinheads. And so lots of rambling, but they ignored the sociocultural history behind punk songs and did not do a close reading of the lyrics, did not acknowledge the stances that the musicians themselves and the scene at large took against white supremacy, and simply thought it was just loud and angry music that was just angry to be angry and loud to be loud.
I have a question for Jordan. Jordan, I found I found the design of your project fascinating, and I particularly was interested in the subjects that you had that were responding to the questions about ritual. And in particular, the definitions of ritual that you said that they identified with, they struck me as remarkably eloquent to have been kind of like volunteered by them. Am I correct about this? Did they choose these out of a multiple choice lineup, or did they volunteer that language themselves? And could you talk a little bit more about what some of the other options for conceptualizing ritual might have been?
So after the participant observation, I went through informal interviews with both participants. And so while I was doing the participant observation, we both went to Target. We were individually picking out things, and I was observing their behaviors. I was jotting down questions to ask them, right? Like, for example, one participant that I went with was purchasing gifts for a younger sibling. Right. So I was like, why is he grabbing this bag? Why did he pick up this wrapping paper? Right. But a big point that Miller develops while he's writing the book, this had nothing to do with his original research interests in 1994 and 1995, but closer to 1998 when the book comes out, is that you can watch the same way that someone goes about shopping. They'll do the same thing when they're going in a ritual, right? You'll pick the best thing that you can find. You'll then give it away to something else, to someone else. And specifically when you're giving it away to something else, you're giving it away to something that is bigger than yourself, and oftentimes as a form of devotion or of love. And then that item then returns back to the profane. The same thing happens when you're shopping, especially when we're talking about like treats. That heavily follows it, right? So when I was doing these informal interviews afterwards, I was just working off of those, but literally with one participant, we were standing in their kitchen and we just had a conversation, and I was taking notes as we went. And it was that participant that went on and used the quote, like temporal components. He loves to use big words. So it was very casual for him to kind of talk about that. And of course, I had so many follow-up questions to that, where it's like, what do you mean by temporal? What do you mean by components? What are the components of a ritual? So it wasn't necessarily they had a list to pick from. It was their own understandings. There was a little bit of leading, right, to try to get them like, okay, so let's talk about profane, let's talk about sacred, and how does that play into your concept? But for the most part, it was just them kind of having this open dialogue with me about their own understandings of ritual and religion.
Thank you. That answers my question wonderfully and is absolutely fascinating. Yes, I believe that is Emilia.
Yes, I have a question for all three of the participants. I'm curious what led you to choose the topics that you did?
I'll go ahead and answer this question. So my mother is Japanese, actually, and I have spent a lot of time in Japan because of this. I have family who live in Japan, so ever since I was a little kid, I've been going to Japan. And when I was about 13 or 14, I went to Japan, and I had just started to get into anime and manga. And I went to Akihabara, which is like the anime hub of Japan. It's this beautiful little city where everything is just about anime. And while I was there, I went to a specific store called Animate, which is all about anime merch and manga. And while I was perusing the manga bookstore, I stumbled upon this little section of the bookstore, and it's quite interesting actually. There was like the main part of the bookstore, and then there was like a secret hallway, and then like this door with some curtains in front of it that you had to like open and come into this new type of room that was just all about yaoi and BL. And when I discovered this as a 13-year-old, obviously I had no clue what any of that was. And I remember being really confused by a lot of the things that I saw that day. So it prompted me to do some research on it. And last semester, I was in an anthropology class, and we had to choose a contemporary social issue to discuss. And I thought I would love to go more in depth on this subculture that I had found that I didn't quite know a lot about, but I thought it was so interesting how it was kind of hidden in plain sight, and how, this subculture kind of works like that, how it's hidden in plain sight, how many fujoshi are hidden within the vast population of Japanese. Thank you.
I mean, I can quickly follow that up. Mine is not at all as interesting or fascinating. This was just an assignment that I had to do for a class last semester. I took an economic anthropology class, and the prompt was, so you've read Daniel Miller's book. Here's a basic understanding of how he breaks down these components of shopping and his secondary argument of ritual, and run with it, do something. You got to interview some people, you got to do some participant observation, but past that, that was the rubric. And so this is what I came up with.
For me, I was in the same culture anthropology class as Emmy last semester, and I've always been interested in alternative subcultures. I think they're fascinating. It's like, they're kind of like the forbidden subcultures, especially with how they're portrayed in media as being very violent and rebellious and therefore negative. And with this assignment, since we had to discuss a culture that was outside the US, it finally gave me the excuse to do further research, and specifically finally be able to take a look at the actual birthplace of punk. Like, now I finally have a reason to do research. I'm not just like wasting my time or whatever.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Jorge, and the question is addressed to Jordan. Given a chance to do more research, would you keep your sample size even, as in the 50-50 ratios that you have between male and female participants? Or would you look to collect data more on those that are transgender, binary, etc., rather than simply male or female, to make it perhaps more focused on those groups, or rather than having it as an even 50-50?
I think if I redid it, I would keep the 50-50 breakdown, just because the focus of the research was to have a comparison of the female research so I could relate it back to Miller's, but then expanding on it with that male perspective and really honing in on that. Though I think it would be incredible for someone to kind of run with this idea of, let's further test Miller's theory, which is kind of not really known in anthropology of retesting, because it is quite complicated, unlike in hard sciences, like especially in chemistry or biology. But I think it would be incredible for someone to take this and then go their own separate route and look into transgender, non-binary, etc., household makeups. Just because, as I said, Miller really went with that heteronormative household structure, and there are so many complicated household structures out there. I mean, he does dabble a little bit into the single mother household structure, but past that, it is still a cisgendered woman with her offspring. So opening it up to those other households would further just test Miller's theory and the application it can have to the kind of households that we see more often nowadays.
Sophie.
I have a question for Emmy. I recently read an essay by anthropologist Henry Jenkins, and he specializes in looking at media, and particularly he was the first academic to kind of take fandom seriously. And he has an essay where he interviewed a group of American women who wrote slash, and so specifically they wrote slash fan fiction about Spock and Kirk from Star Trek. And I swear I'm going somewhere with this. I was wondering if, from like your knowledge, if I don't know how, if you in the past or you are familiar with at least American fan fiction and American slash. I was wondering if there were any differences and similarities between the way Fujoshis write slash and perceive gay relationships, between how American women write slash and perceive gay relationships.
That is a great question. While I do not know much about like slash fiction in America, what I can say from what I do know is that the difference between Fujoshi and maybe Americans who are doing something similar, first of all, I would say the medium which they are doing it. Fujoshi are generally writing manga and graphic novels. And from my understanding of American fan fiction, most of it is actually written and it's not drawn. So some difference I can see there is that one of the big characteristics of yaoi is that it's very graphic. And I think the difference between the two is that, you know, whenever you're reading something, you can kind of paint a picture, and it might be a little bit less graphic if you're reading it. But when you are actively seeing the pictures, their drawings are very, very graphic. It's genuinely kind of like if you were to watch porn, that's probably the same experience you would get from reading yaoi. It's like the Fujoshi made their own porn for themselves. Another difference is the society's different views on homosexuality. In Japan, homosexuality is not really condoned yet. In America, we're still struggling with homophobia, but I definitely would say that America is much more accepting of homosexuals as of right now than Japan is. And because of this, I can see, I know some, not fan fiction from America, but I do know a lot of homosexual literature in America where it depicts real relationships between homosexual people. But in yaoi, there is no real depiction. It's the ideas that these Fujoshi have of what homosexual sex looks like, and what, not even what it looks like, not even the idea of what it looks like, but what they want to see. So I think that's a big difference between the two, if that answers your question. Thank you for asking.
And that brings us to 1:50 p.m., which I believe is technically supposed to be the end of this session. I'm not sure, Eric, do you have to bounce off to go host another session?
I do. If the conversation would like to continue going, I can make you host, Adam, and y'all can continue talking as long as you like.
Yeah, that'll be fine. I don't want to cut the conversation off. I'll just note that if you were waiting for 1:50, it's 1:50 now. And those who would like to continue to talk, please do.
Thank you all.
I have a question for Sophie about, it's something you mentioned that you had to condense a lot for this presentation from your paper. And I had the good fortune to be able to read your paper. And in the paper, you went a little bit more into detail about, I guess for lack of a better word, we might call kind of resistance from the punk left against infiltration from the racist right. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and perhaps if there are lessons to be learned today about subcultures being invaded from outside groups that they'd prefer to not be identified with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Thank you. I will say, yeah, I cut that part out of my presentation, primarily my interests, because I thought, at least personally, I thought it would be interesting to discuss, like, oh, punk, like, be blunt and say punk hasn't always been political, hasn't always supported minorities and been against homophobia and racism especially. And so, but I did really want to talk about the response. And so I discussed two different responses in the past and the present. In the past, in the 1980s and 70s, and by extension into the 90s, punk, when they finally got themselves together, for lack of a better word, and finally went, oh, we do need to support the minorities that we did culturally appropriate, they became very resistant against white supremacy. And their primary method was by focusing on youth, on like young people, because it's the same tactic that the far right was using. It's like whoever could get to the young people first could indoctrinate them. I hate to say indoctrinate in terms of punk, but on the far right, definitely. But whoever could get to them first would be the first one to ingrain their ideology into them. And since punk had the pillars of being a primarily music and fashion-based subculture, they had a very big advantage in getting to young people first and educating them, and specifically educating them on why white supremacy is bad and why the National Front was bad, especially because at the time there was a leader of the National Front who was running for political office in Britain at the time. And so obviously on the streets, people were promoting him. His face was all over newspapers. And so punks in the scene had to be like, hey, it's not that great. So they had to get to them first. And young people, obviously, they loved the music, they loved the fashion, and especially punk is such an artistic subculture. And so the use of like zines and self-produced music shows and festivals, they were able to build up a resistance against white supremacy and the National Front very quickly, and much better than the National Front was at indoctrinating youth. And their attempts, especially their biggest event, their biggest festival was Rock Against Racism, and which was incredibly large. A incredibly large music festival where it kind of like all their little festivals where they had set up before, where they were promoting zines or promoting zines and music and such, had all come together into this huge music festival that very much angered the National Front, but was very successful in finally ingraining resistance against white supremacy and a resistance against conservatism and the far right into the punk subculture for good, especially in the British scene. I have to say, the American punk scene was a little bit more ahead of in terms of that. And in the present, since white supremacists have somewhat learned their lesson and aren't consistently trying to get into the British punk scene to the extent they were in the late 20th century, there are still, I would say, like intruders that don't explicitly say they're neo-Nazis or don't explicitly say that they're part of any sort of far-right groups. And so this has led to people using the internet to become like whistleblowers and to inform people in the punk scene, in the British punk scene, about people who are neo-Nazis and who are a part of these movements. Specifically, off the top of my head, there's a blog that has been active for a couple of years and has also a Facebook page where they consistently post about band members and just in either entire bands or musicians that are in the punk scene, and they tell them about, they basically call them out and tell everyone, hey, I don't know if you knew this, but he's a neo-Nazi, or he's actively involved in a far-right organization, or even to the extent of, oh, he's a pedophile or he has criminal charges against him. It's basically a whole call out, and they do it in order to protect the scene ever since Rock Against Racism punks became much, much more protective of the scene and much, much more resistant against white supremacists. And as for future subcultures or for the future of punk or just other alternative subcultures in general, I think with these subcultures being alternative and left-leaning in politics, I think ever since Rock Against Racism and the corresponding events where white supremacists really tried to get into the punk scene, it kind of taught a lesson to everyone else. And so I think a lot of alternative subcultures are much, much more open about their politics now and their ideologies and what they're against and what they're for than they were several decades ago. Hopefully that answers your question. I rambled on, but thank you.
It was very thorough. Thank you. Coming up on 1:59 now. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, indeed. Thank you all to all of the presenters and the moderators for putting all this all together. I agree. It was very interesting and enjoyable. I am not sure exactly where, but my sense is the recording of this session is going to be available. Please do contact the organizers of this symposium if you're looking for that information. Aside from that, thanks again to the presenters. Thank you to the members of the audience who came. And I look forward to seeing folks around campus. I hope we can continue to have these conversations. Take care.